Hey, YouTube, hang on while I read into the podcast. Welcome to hashtag HealMeToo at home with insights, art, and activism to meet the needs of now. I'm Hope Simpson, the artist, activist, survivor, and founder of the HealMeToo Festival and podcast. If you're listening on Apple or any podcast, you might want to check out the YouTube channel for the HealMeToo podcast and festival, where you can watch the video of this interview and every recent episode. In the HealMeToo at Home series, I'm talking to advocates and healing practitioners about all the different traumas that survivors and communities are experiencing right now, with a special focus on stories you may not be hearing about and ideas, tools, and actions that may help. Subscribe to the HealMeToo podcast today on YouTube and Apple or anywhere you get podcasts. And follow us at HealMeTooFest on social media to hear about every new episode and every live event we hope to start offering on Zoom. A quick note about today: we won't focus on graphic details, but I do encourage you to take a break or skip ahead anytime you need. And you can find a list of support resources at HealMeTooPodcast.com. At live hashtag HealMeToo events, we always start with community agreements, and I've decided to start offering one of them at the top of every episode for the rest of season 3. It's called Ouch, Oops, O, or the 3 O's, and I offer this tool with full knowledge that I am white, cis, middle class, and though I'm passionately working for social justice in my role as an activist leader and in this platform, I make mistakes. And so if I say or do anything that causes discomfort or hurt, or you just would like to educate me a bit, please know I hope that podcast listeners and guests will feel invited to say ouch, so that I can say oops and then listen in the spirit of O to learn to do better. One thing I hope goes perfectly today is our use of Zoom. I am back in New Hampshire, and earlier today our Wi-Fi went out, so we'll see. Now I am really excited to welcome Akia Squitieri, an award-winning producer, director, arts administrator, and anti-harassment advocate. She is the founding artistic director of Rising Sun Performance Company and co-executive director for the Innovative Theater Foundation and New York Innovative Theater Awards. She is also the founder of Creating Safe Spaces, an anti-harassment training company for theatrical environments. And I am delighted to welcome Akia.
Thanks so much for having me, Hope. I am delighted to be here.
Yes, I'm very excited we are getting to have this conversation. And I also want to just double check if I did say your name correctly.
Yes, sometimes in Italian it's a hard Q, so Squitieri, but
Oh my gosh.
that's okay. The first name is what counts, so thank
Can
you
you
so
say
much.
it for me again?
Sure, it's Akia Squitieri.
Squitieri. I mean,
Squitieri.
I've just put the emphasis on the wrong
No
syllable,
worries.
but
No, totally fine.
Squitieri.
Yes,
That
perfect.
is really a cool name.
Thanks.
I should have asked you before we started, so my apologies.
No worries.
I want to say first up that it's nice to be talking to a theater person, and I don't know when our last episode on the podcast actually was addressing theater, but obviously this podcast arose out of a theatrical festival. You know, we had 3 weeks with, no, it was 19 days with 30 events and multiple shows, etc. So it's nice to sort of get back to talking to an artist and talking about theater with you. And I'd love for maybe you to start by filling listeners and viewers in about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I wear a lot of hats in the theater industry. I worked, my sort of day work is in commercial off-Broadway theater, and my heart and artistic practice is mostly in the downtown indie theater community. So I straddle both of those worlds. Um, my I came to theater as a musical theater performer and dancer, and by happenstance fell into directing and realized I really loved the the creation and the camaraderie and seeing a piece evolve from start to finish. Uh, so I sort of drew back from performing because I realized it wasn't performative. As much as I love audiences and creating characters, it really was about working with that team and seeing something come from seed to full fruition. Um, and from there, I fell into company management. I was the company manager for Blue Man Group at the Astor Place Theater for
cool.
over 10 years. And that is really where I fell in love with the sort of traditional HR for theater and the human resources, and being the caretaker of a space and a company of artists was something I really was drawn to and embraced and loved. Uh, and my training practice really came out of the 2017 Me Too movement, where I was finding that we were in a place of people telling their stories, and there was a lot of trauma and a lot of storytelling, which is all really important, and a lot of bravery and hard work was being done. But we were in this place as a community and as an industry where we're like, okay, we know what's wrong. Now what do we do? Mm-hmm. And it felt like a moment where I had that corporate traditional HR, the EEOC understanding and those systems mechanisms. But I was also not seeing any training programs were specifically at that time addressing theater making. Like, we are creative beings. It's not about censoring the work. It's not about saying you can't have intimate moments on stage. It's not to say, it is an industry that is naturally ripe for pitfalls, right? Like, people are on the road and in buses and sharing hotel rooms, and personal relationships develop really easy out of intense settings. And like with any work environment, there's still uneven power structures. And there wasn't, at that time, I was personally finding as an art maker, a lot of tangible action steps of what companies and organizations could be doing from an HR standpoint and a systems standpoint. So that is how these trainings came to be. And obviously there's been a lot of amazing work in the field since 2017. And we have the Chicago Theater Standards. They did some amazing groundbreaking work. So there's a lot of people doing the work now. But at that time, I really felt the calling. Like, I had this HR corporate background and a theater making background, and how can I marry those two worlds to be a resource? So that's really how I came to this work.
That's amazing. And you do some consulting. That's sort of the way that it.
I do. So my work has manifested in a few ways. In 2018, I was doing a lot of speaking engagements. I partnered with
a lot of what engagements?
I'm sorry, speaking engagements. So I was a speaker at the TCG National Conference. I done some webinars and workshops with Chamber Music Conference Association of America, and then I was working with varying sizes of theater companies, going in and doing anti-harassment training, both for their staff and for their artists. I was doing a lot of work with festivals. So, there's this unique environment where a festival has people coming into their space for 3 weeks and then you never see them again, but also having accountability and expectations and shared agreements for that intense period of time, and renters. So I was doing a lot of work with theaters and venues in addition to producing organizations, and trying to be flexible and adapting the work to the different spaces, which is also an interesting conversation to have with different spaces and their needs. And the need of an individual artist is going to be much different than the need of an institution or a renting organization. But at the end of the day, those expectations and agreements are very similar. So listening, having conversations, and trying to give tangible tools that are like, okay, here's 5 things that don't take money. There was a lot of resistance when this work was starting to happen of like, well, I don't have a budget to do that. I'm a small downtown artist and I don't have an HR department. I run my theater company off of $5,000. And I was like, that's great. You don't have to have money to make an environment safe. You don't have to have money, as you were saying, to have a meeting agreement or a one sheet on who someone can go to if there's a problem, or a grievance or an ouch moment. So it was that those were those little light bulb moments, as I like to call them, where people were really resistant to the work because it felt so insurmountable and so big. And it's about all the little baby steps, right? Like, we plant one seed and you get that right. What's the next thing you can do? And I think making the work as barrier free and accessible to as many people was really important to me. So, and still very important to me. It's like, okay, what can we do together as a community? What can we do together about our environments? Because the foundation, right, you can make a beautiful piece of work, but if that 8-week process was miserable or unsafe, or people were scared to speak up, then all the beautiful work in the world is sort of undone by those moments in the rehearsal room that could be prevented.
Right. So I sort of feel like you've just led us right up to the doorway of today, because now theater and everyone and everywhere, we are in a new moment of reckoning, and in fact of accountability, and people being called out. And in the theater, I'm sure a lot of listeners and viewers may not be aware of the nitty-gritty that's occurring in the theater industry, but there's a lot of reckoning with legacies of racism or inequity, at least, and obviously it varies from institution to institution, and I'm really not an authority on what's happening in the industry either. But I feel like what you were just describing is a similar process to what is going on now as institutions. And this is what we were actually, I didn't set up our topic very, very well today, but we were intending to have a conversation about the transformation that's happening at this time in the theater, theatrical work environments, around racial equity and accountability and justice and opportunity, inclusivity. And in the process, we're really not running into, but we're experiencing a moment similar to the Me Too waves of 17 into 18, where people are getting fired or put on administrative leave, at least, and major battles being fought. So with all of that said, to sort of set a context for listeners or viewers, I'd love if you could share. I believe you're sort of in the room where a lot of conversations are happening for these creative environments, and how they are struggling to transform.
Sure. It's a big question. I want to preface, as I said to you earlier, I'm not an EDI trainer, but a lot of the work, as you said, it is overlapping and intersecting, and it's all of it. It's racism, it's ageism, it's ableism, it's sexual harassment, and all of our human LGBTQ, all of it, it's all intersects, right? Our identities, we all have these layered identities, and I think for myself, I am a middle class white woman, heterosexual and cisgender. So I'm listening. I'm doing a lot of listening right now, and a lot of the work I have done, even though I touch on all of those things from an EEOC point, work harassment covers many things. A lot of my work has been about anti-sexual harassment specifically, and I'm realizing that's it all intersects, as you said. And right now, I'm really listening and seeing how I can do better about incorporating all of that into my practice and into my work. As an artistic director, we're having conversations about our values, and I think the thing that I hear that I'm hearing echoed across the boards with this reckoning, this very important moment for our industry. It's the same thing we were hearing in 2017 and 2018 about sexual harassment, that statements are being made. And it's like, okay, that's great that you have these words, that you have these statements. But what are the actual action steps? What are we doing to prevent it? We're very much in the same moment of we are hearing people's testimonies and receipts and stories and unbelievable trauma that has been ignored for so long. It's not new, right? Like that's the thing. I'm having conversations, and some people are like, yep, this has been around forever. And some people in this moment are really shocked and surprised. And it's not new. It's been
some white
there.
people.
Some white people. Yes. Like, so, I'm hearing from theater, theater makers and artistic directors and leadership of large institutions. This is their light bulb moment because we have this huge outcry. And honestly, I don't think we would be in this moment if we weren't all in quarantine. And this moment of our country bubbling, I think it would continue to be washed under the rug in a lot of ways and ignored or placated.
If we had even more of our daily distractions.
Yeah.
I also think that, I'm sorry to jump in,
please.
But I do also think that similar to the Me Too social posting wave that we experienced in 2017, that we have Trump to thank for this moment, because the Band-Aid ripping off experience, which was his election, to understand if one hadn't before, it was made plain just how receptive a great portion of the population in this country is to racist messaging, race baiting, victim, scapegoating, etc. I mean, sometimes I don't even want to name the horrors because it's just all so traumatic. But neither do I want to diminish them by leaving them uncalled out. But anyway, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I do think that things are at a pitch, and also that this may be wrong. I don't know whether we would see all I can say is, and I don't know if it's media coverage that is changed in this moment or actual incidents of lynching and horrific, Ahmaud Arbery. I don't know if that exact event would happen absent. There's no way to know, absent the environment that's been created. I do know that immediately after the election, we saw increased spikes in all kinds of racist and other hate violence. So I'm not trying to say these events weren't always happening. I'm only saying with one particular event, it's impossible to know, would this have happened if Hillary were president? But anyway, I digress.
No, I hear you. Yeah, and it's true. I feel like there's this combination of, and I think even to the point, there was this surprise that people were so emboldened after Trump came into office. There was, that racism wasn't new. It just people didn't feel like it was okay to say it out loud.
It was given license.
It was given license, and it was amplified and encouraged in a lot of ways.
Maybe inflamed in some cases.
Inflamed, and I think that's part, that was the first turn of the dial. And we are in a moment where we can't, people are consuming media and TV and in ways we haven't, because we have nowhere to go. So we are forced as white people to look at it, to look in that mirror and say, it is there, it's always been there. And we're the ones doing it, right? Like this is it. There's no one else we can blame, right? For these things. And I think there's a lot of great work being done. There's still a lot of work to be done. But it is a similar moment of, I feel like we're in that turning point that is hearing the Me Too movement of, we're hearing it, there's the stories, there's receipts, and now we're just sort of on the brink of like, okay, what tangible things can we be doing? There's the We See You White Theater. They have that document. There's been a lot of public uh, open letters to theater
Mhm.
companies, and really specific requests, like really specific things that people can be doing. I think it's I forget the theater's name. I believe it's Baltimore Stages. There was a very large Baltimore theater company that came out yesterday with um, a lot of statements and action items of what they're going to be doing. And I think that is what we need to be doing. And statements are great, and solidarity is great, and allyship is great. Um, but if we're all doing even a little something, that's just going to keep pushing this momentum. And I think there is a very real fear of what's going to happen in 6 months when people are back at work,
Mhm.
and like, are these statements going to mean anything in 6 months?
Mhm.
And that's where that accountability and those action, and it's daily work. It's daily, monthly, weekly work and conversations that have to continue. Um, yeah,
So let's talk about that. I know you shared with me this idea that we're in a moment of needing to foster a culture of care in our workplaces going forward. So let's talk about that, and also work in some concrete
sure.
ways that we as individuals, and also speaking of we, I want to just be acknowledge, like, we are two. Is it all right to ask? Oh no, you already did identify as a white person. So
That's okay.
we're two self-identifying white folks talking about all these issues of inclusivity and justice. But so I'm actually kind of interested in the conversation between us as white people, thinking what is incumbent on us to do, what do we have the opportunity, or I can speak for myself, like the process that I'm in as a sometimes producer, as a very, very, very small sometimes employer. There's so, I mean, it's all in the details, it's all in the relationships. And um, so I'm interested to hear your thoughts about fostering a culture of care, and any specifics that come to mind for you about the things that we need to be changing in what we do in our day to day.
Sure. It's yeah. Again, it's a great and big question. Um, I think in terms of having a holistic approach, and this is, like I said before, I am not an EDI expert.
Oh, and I want
I
to
am a
just, for anybody who's not
Oh,
familiar,
yes.
equity, diversity, and inclusion. And the other one you used, EEOC, equal opportunity.
Commission. It's the EEOC. Yeah, the council or commission.
Mhm.
It's the federal department on um, employment law, basically, and the protected classes, and federal guidelines, and civil acts
Mhm.
that relate to employment law. Um, with all of this that's happening, and I am quite openly re-examining my own practice, and how I can do better in spaces as a white leader, or
Mhm.
a white trainer. The question, and it's a lot about asking questions and self assessment. And whenever I approach consulting work, I always ask the question, what is the end result you want? What are you hoping for? And the thing I always try to remind, and sometimes I am brought in as we just need to check a box and say we've done it. Um, that is very transparent, and people can see through that. And I openly understand, as someone who freelances and has side hustles and has a small company, there is never enough time in the day. But we have to, like, this is stuff that doesn't have to cost money. These are things that take time. They should be intentional. um, I think us as a society, us as an industry, there's always a sense of urgency of getting it done so we can get on to the next thing, and we have all of these lists. So one, like you said before, of giving yourself the grace to make mistakes, owning those mistakes. um, People shouldn't be doing the work alone. In in the sense of, have a community. If you're a theater company or an organization or a corporation, um, have a lot of voices at the table. Have really clear expectations of what you want? Is it just creating a policy? Is it creating action steps? Is it, be really clear and mindful and intentional about what that end result is. Um, and as you said before, like this culture of care, not only are we dealing with a pandemic, we are dealing with a huge lens on the very real racism in our society. Sexual harassment has not gone anywhere as much as right, like, I mean, as much as we would like to think after all of the public outcry and all of the
Right.
articles and media, it's still there.
Oh, it's happening, of course, all the time. And I'm sure it's still happening even with people not being in a shared workspace. It's not
Yeah,
like technology prohibits people from being abusive in whatever ways.
yeah. And we it's all of these layers. It's people who are physically, emotionally exhausted. And when we open the doors to whatever our theaters, our venues, our offices, our schools, people are coming back traumatized. Like, this is
Hmm.
real trauma. This is real emotional labor that our whole country is going through together in very different ways. Clearly, like everybody's
Hmm.
identity and layers and nuances.
Hmm.
Um, so, as someone had said to me, and it was such a beautiful metaphor of, it's often like, oh, we're all in the same boat. It's like, no, we're all in the same storm in different boats.
Oh, what a great
Right. And I was
metaphor.
like, oh, wow, yes, that is such a great statement, because it's true. Like, we're all experiencing this storm, but our boats are of different sizes and shapes and sturdiness
Hmm.
and resources, and
Yeah,
some
big
have many
differences.
rowers. So, right, like, it was just I was
Some
like,
are
oh
still
yeah.
using what is that? Pre-technology, oh, I can't think of it. I'm wasting time. I
No,
want
it's
a
okay.
lovely little word. Anyway, yeah, the metaphor's great.
So that just stuck with me. So, giving people space, the companies having this expectation that they're going to be able to be like, great, office is open, we're back to 40 hours a week. um, we know you might have kids and you don't know how they're being educated right now, and we don't, like, there's just so much. So, I'm rambling a little bit, but there is a point to this. So I think, in terms of, as leaders, of giving people the room to ask for what they need, I
Hmm.
think being really transparent about the resources you have, at whether you're an employer or a director or a producer. um, Transparency goes a long way, and being candid and honest, um, not making promises that you can't keep. I think that's a big one, of setting, if you're a leader, or setting guidelines or meeting agreements or expectations for yourself. Be really honest with yourself and each other and the people under your care, of what you have the capacity to give, so that somebody can make that decision to come into the space, with
Oh, you're
you or
talking
for
about
you.
safety in the space.
Yeah. So I
Is
think
that
just
what you
like
mean?
safety in the space, but even
From
returning
the,
to the workforce, of we're all coming out of this, and coming out of this, and we're still in it. So when we're talking about, to your point of like, what can we tangibly do? I think that's the first step of care, of action, of understanding and giving yourself a self-assessment as an employer or a creative space or a leader. What can I do, and what are the resources I have to care for the people coming back into my work environment? And I think that's step one, of just sit with it a little bit, and don't try to solve that right away. Because the more intentional and honest we can be, I think that lays a really strong foundation to build everything else on. It's just, let's be honest. Give yourself a challenge, make some goalposts, make some goals for yourself. Um, but, be strategic in, are you going to solve all of the problems in your organization at once? Hopefully the end line you will, but prior, like, what are the, what is the baseline of what can I do for this space? So I guess, just going back, I think it's important for anyone that is about to reopen their space or their working environment to do a real self-assessment, of
who they want to be inviting into their space, who's missing from those conversations, and being honest both with themselves and the people coming in. These are the resources we have. This is what we're working towards. And asking the questions, what do you need to be safe? Like what, I think we're in a time people should be listening and asking questions and not solving these challenges and these problems alone. Like nobody should be working in a vacuum or a silo, period. Like if you're an independent producer, then go find a few other producers that do similar work and talk to them about how they're addressing the time that we are in and what is missing, and talking to the people they're working with. Like get everyone in a room and have that uncomfortable conversation. Or if again, we don't want to bring more trauma to people, so find another way. If you want feedback, if you have a theater company, and I just had a great conversation with a fellow artistic director yesterday, and they sent out an anonymous survey to all of their artists of what their experience was on the last 3 shows and what was missing and how that process was. And
this was around racial equity, or this was around
it was around
all issues?
It was primarily racial equity, but they had some other questions in there. I was like, did people know where to go to if there was a problem? All of these things. The other thing I hear a lot, which sounds obvious and makes me a little crazy as like the HR brain, is I often work with an organization or I talk to a theater company. They're like, well, we have an HR department or we have a handbook.
Oh.
That's great. That handbook is given out to somebody their first day of employment. Where does that handbook live? Where does that go?
In the bottom of the bottom drawer. I mean,
right?
Nobody reads that stuff.
So, there's the obvious things of like, oh, well, we have a posting where, the state compliance laminated poster lives. A lot of people don't want, that's the things I hear. And it's
minimum.
Like, that's the bare minimum. And you should have at least 2 people, preferably 3, that are not only designated, known, that these are people you can go talk to if there's a problem, but also to make sure that those people are trained if there's a problem. That is something too I hear from supervisors of like, well, we are designated to be the go-to person if somebody has a problem, but we don't always know what to do if there's a problem. So train your folks in bare minimum, like have anti-harassment training, have anti-racism and anti-bias training. There are free resources, an organization that I am so enamored with, and I encourage all of the listeners to go check out. It's called Holla Back. I don't know.
Yeah.
They do.
I'm going to be interviewing their founder.
They're amazing.
They are amazing. They
and
are.
I personally have been working through all of their online sessions. Like
Trainings.
we never,
yes.
Our learning should never stop, right? Like our learning is ongoing. We're evolving humans. So I'm really trying to uplift all of these great organizations, and I know you have a wonderful list, but like Hollaback does it for free, like, or donation based. And I think that's the thing, is like, it doesn't have to cost money. Some of it does. If you have money, use it. But there's great resources out there.
Yeah.
That was a little rambly. I hope I hit
I
some
loved
of it. Yeah.
I loved it. Thank you. And it had me thinking about, a lot of what I've done has been very seat of the pants in the sense of founding this festival in 1 year, where I just worked nonstop and I assembled a teeny tiny crew and we all worked really hard. And I was like, I'm this festival about, anti-harassment and healing sexual violence, and I don't have the documents that, I should have. And I was honestly so buried and I just couldn't. But let's say, for next time, I need to get that shit together.
Yeah.
Because it really does matter for people to know. And there's just conversations I'm realizing that I need to be having up front with one of the things that actually, you go ahead. I sort of overrode an impulse you had there. I'd love to hear what it was.
Oh, I just want to acknowledge, right, that my, like I said before, my heart is in scrappy downtown indie theater, and I totally acknowledge the challenges of often people are doing it around their day jobs or a side hustle, and there aren't enough hours in the day. And I think we acknowledge that and say, all right, great, we know it, and we're gonna, like you said, like, I need to do better next time. And that's step one. Like, there's certainly moments in my past history I'm like, oh gosh, did I really do that? Did I say that? That's like, ooh,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to be okay and sit in it and be like, I screwed up, and say, all right, I want to make amends and acknowledge it and learn from it. And to your point before about call out culture, I think that's this moment is you're hearing stories of people that had moments and moments and moments.
Ah,
And I think for me, that's the difference, right? Is
mm-hmm,
I'm
mm-hmm.
I'm not someone who is like, cancel everybody.
No,
But there is also
but
moments where
time for a change.
time for a change, and you had opportunity. It's how you respond in that moment. And of course we have our defense mechanisms and our egos
Yeah.
and our hurt. We're humans. The hope is be like, okay, gonna sit in it. And maybe the first time you didn't get it, but when it's like 3, 4, 5, 10 times, and
Mm,
you're hearing the same, that's a pattern. And
mm-hmm,
that is where these letters and these calls for action and these call outs are happening. And I've been
mm-hmm.
having a lot of conversations because at first, like, oh, like, should you give them another chance? And then you're like, well, when 20 people are saying the same thing,
That's 20 chances.
that's 20 chances, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's a
Yeah.
big difference. So
Right.
I think
There
it's
were a
in a
lot
way
of
where
opportunities.
there's a lot of opportunity. But anyway, I'm
Hmm.
sorry I cut you
No,
off.
no, I'm really glad you got to that because I know that in a moment like this, I'm hearing stories from folks who are close to some of these, moments that are happening in theaters. And one of the stories that I heard is, one of the theaters that's getting called out, and a person of color, I forget if it was a writer or a director, who's long, long, long ally of one of these leaders who's being called out, and for whom it's very painful because their own personal experience hasn't been that. And yet, so I'm just bringing that in to acknowledge like the multiplicity of life, and that, an individual relationship doesn't necessarily give you the indication
Right.
of the pattern. And that, yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying about sometimes when your initial reaction might be, oh, well, this is a beloved figure, or, oh, I have a relationship to this person, even if it's one of the famous people who, have been Me Too'd, where you're like, really? I'm really bummed about that. I was so bummed about Kevin Spacey, but oh my God, But the first
Yeah.
reaction might be like, no, beloved, brilliant performer that I love. And then, but then you come to understand more. So,
Yeah.
but I do believe in where it's appropriate, well, I guess that's really what you're saying, opportunities for amends and for repair and learning to do better, but
Yeah.
there's different different tools in different moments, or different solutions to different problems.
And the response too. And I,
Mm.
we hear accountability a lot.
Hmm.
And that's the thing too, is like, if somebody is not taking accountability, and you can, as someone who's made mistakes, I've certainly been like, I didn't do that, or that's not what I meant.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I am tend to move through life of like, okay, assume best intent until proven otherwise.
Hmm.
um but there's also like, okay, like, that might not have been your intention, but the impact was different than your intention. And we also have to be aware of that minutia as well, of like, okay, well, yes, you had good intent, but you still did damage, and you still caused trauma, and you still caused hurt. So how are you going to now respond and respond and now change your ways moving forward.
Right.
And that's the difference. And I think across these movements, across Black Lives Matters and the anti-racism that is being called, being lifted up in our industry, and anti-harassment and sexual harassment, that echo is the same across the board of like, take accountability, learn, listen, don't be so quick, right? Like there's this also that fine line of like, not fine line, but that balance of we want to quickly repair and make change
Oh, yeah.
without intention, right? Of like, I just want to fix it, or I just want to like make a public statement,
I
and
want to make it go away.
I want to make it go away.
Yeah. Is what I
And
think is often going on there
yeah, and then sometimes it's like,
deep down.
we just need to sit in it for a minute and be like,
Hmm.
all right, let's think about it. And now let's do
Yeah.
something.
Well, that ouch, oops, oh tool that I learned it at a Art New York workshop. And one of the things I loved about it was it's not I'm sorry, it's oops, because I'm sorry can shift the attention. Actually, now if the conversation continues after I said I'm sorry, then maybe I'm a victim of being beat up on. I've already apologized, or
Yeah.
I'm so sorry and I'm so ashamed, and now the focus is on me and I've missed the chance to actually listen and learn, which, as you're saying, is the essential piece. And you can't do that if you're rushing into action mode,
Yeah.
or, you don't even know what to fix right away necessarily. I think in terms of the, I caused harm and I didn't intend it, there's so many ways that our white privilege has allowed us to be unaware and uninformed and blind and, just within our own frame of reference, which means that we don't really know what we're doing. So the intention is only, as you're saying, really only part of what matters. It's not everything. And
Yeah.
it doesn't matter in a sense. If I didn't intend to step on your toe, I still stepped on your toe. And I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
But
I I'm a big proponent when I'm speaking to individual artists, and when I enter a room of like, when I'm setting up a room to work as a director, or whatever, of like, what you give permission for people to ask what you need, like, what do you need? um and that is always a question, like, if it's a table reading at a first day of rehearsal, if it's walking to a space for a training, if it's like, don't be afraid to ask for what you need. um and again, that goes back to the transparency of like, we might not have all the answers, we might not have all the resources, but let me know what you need so that at least I can give you an answer if I can do it. And uh, I think one of the other things I tell individuals is the way that we can self-regulate or have accountability in our industry is at interviews of like, what is your policy on this? What is your action plan, or what are you doing to address this within your company or in the show, or what avenues? And I think that it's you know artists often, or employees or staff, or often don't feel empowered or like they have the permission to ask these
hmm
things.
hmm
And I one of the things I hope, in this idea of culture of care, that it should always be a two-way conversation, that it's not just the people in power that are making the decisions of what the culture is going to be.
mm.
That, when you're entering a space, if you're at an interview or the first day of rehearsal, ask the questions if they're not being brought up, of like, hey, who, if it's not an equity show, who do I go to if there's an incident, or a problem? What is our policy on XYZ? These are the things
Mhm.
that matter to me. And that in itself feels really scary to people, but the
Mhm,
hope is,
mhm,
if enough people start asking those questions,
mhm,
that the person that is hiring, or the person that is leading that space or directing that show, be like, oh, this is a thing. This is actually not just one person who is just making trouble. This is something I need to think about. And, hopefully, even if one person asks the question, they're not going to be viewed as a troublemaker. But that also is a fear of individuals of like, well, if I speak up or if I speak out, I'm the one putting myself in the line, or I'm going to now be labeled as that person who always has something to say,
an agenda or whatever.
And it's like lead with love, lead with kindness, lead with the hope that we're all in this space wanting the same thing, but don't assume it. Lift it up, ask the questions. I think that is one way that we can empower ourselves as artists, as freelancers. Make it a part of the hiring conversation, make it a part of the interview, make it a part of your contract. Like that is something. It's like these are, you hear of Hollywood celebrities have all these writers. What if we start asking for these writers of, I want to know on first day of rehearsal that these mechanisms have been placed, these culture of care, these ethics, or these codes, in order for me to fully give myself to this project. This is how I would like to work in this space. And it might not be able to, the organization or the company will not be able to reach all of those things, but at least it's a starting point. And that is a two-way. I loved how you started this with, let's start with a meeting agreement. Let's start every space with a conversation of what are our expectations for sharing a room together, and what are we to hold myself accountable for, and what are you going to hold yourself accountable for? I think expectations and transparency is so important to this work on so many levels.
Yeah. Thank you, Akia.
Yeah.
Squitieri.
Yes.
Did I
love it. You did.
Good. We sort of run our time, but I have a feeling we may find a time to have another conversation in the future, because I feel like we're barely scratching the surface. And I wanted to talk about the moment that we're in now in the theater community, but I do, and you covered a lot, I think, about your work in sexual harassment prevention and intervention, but I'd love to continue talking about the transformation of our workplaces around that issue specifically, and in the theater. So thank you.
I would love that. Thank you. I know, so that went so fast, and I hope we at least covered some of this stuff.
We did.
I'm passionate about it. It's like we're human beings, and theater is hard work. Like we don't always, people who aren't in theater don't look at it as work, and it is work. We're asking people to do hard stuff on stage and behind stage, and
it's so
we're asking people to be vulnerable.
It's so vulnerable and personal in the relationships. Like all of our work relationships are vulnerable, personal relationships, because they're relationships. But these are ones where we're really, depending on the material in the show, but in any show, in any work that you're doing to create, it's bringing so much of yourself into such intimate contact with your coworkers. That's it for today. Tune in next week or every week for ideas that may help with the needs of right now, whether you're a survivor, an ally, or a member of communities experiencing stress and trauma in these times. In the meantime, catch up on the episodes and extras from our first and second seasons. Subscribe to the HealMeToo podcast and festival YouTube channel and Apple Podcasts. If you actually take a second to give us a rating and review on iTunes, you will help more survivors and allies to find us. You can also join our mailing list at HealMeTooPodcast.com to hear about our future festival pop-up events on Zoom. And I hope you will follow us on social media. We are at HealMeTooFest. Please say hi in the comments and take care. Thanks for listening.